So how does one even begin? Start by choosing a table. And this person chose Z5 multiplication. You can invent your own table if you want. This person chose to create his own system. And he substituted in all of these. He chose to do a nullifier, which you will notice creates a nice pattern for most of these. And what started as this table with these elements became this masterpiece. Then what you do is you get rid of the headings, and for every single element you create an artistic element that you want to substitute in. So every time this person is going to see a 0 in his or her table, you are going to place this element there. So this person went with some sort of triangles, and so then they recreated their table. So every time they see a 0, they are going to have this blue element. So notice, here's the zeros going across and down, here are the zeros going across and down. And then every time they see a 1, they're going to have this gold triangle. So here's a 1, there's the gold triangle. Here's a 1, there's the gold triangle. Here's another one, gold triangle, gold triangle. Every time there's a 2, you'll see the blue triangle. So here's a 2 and a 2, blue and blue, 2 and a 2, blue and blue, and so on. And so eventually you recreate your table using all your new elements. Then cool, you have a nice square-ish table, but I don't want it square. So the next trick is your distortion. This person chose to distort it as a rhombus, and you can see that they worked on using a compass construction because you can see the little tick marks. And what did this end up looking like? Well, here's this distortion. Here's the final part of their distortion. And then what they did was they took this table and they reflected it. And they reflected it across this line. So as you can see, this piece gets reflected like a mirror over here. This piece is reflected over here. And so it creates a lovely mirror reflection. Then they wanted to do another reflection down here. Takes a lot of work to do a reflection, but it creates a really neat pattern. And you get a full table. So as you can see, this complete table started here. It came from here, and it started with this little system and these elements. This person chose Z5 addition and then created these elements. So every time a 0 occurred, the red and black triangles would appear. So let's look for these red and black triangles along this 0 pattern. And so here they are, here and going across. Now the person put this in for 3, so we will see that element occur in these pos spots. And as you can see, here's that 3 and also right there. Now once they got that, they then distorted it into a rhombus, like so, and that was the distortion they used. A really important component of your project will be creating and using elements that will fuse to create larger pieces of art. So if you take this triangle here as an example, this is a fusion of 2 elements. One of the elements is this diagonal with the blue on the bottom and the yellow on the top. And the other element is an opposite diagonal with the blue on the bottom and the yellow on the top. Those are 2 different elements, and when they were put together, they fused to make this larger triangle, making that a nicer setup piece of art. Over here, you also have 2 elements. This one with the red square at the top left, and this is an entirely different element with a red square in the top right. When you put those next to one another, they fuse together. When you put them next to one another in reverse order, see, this is the same element right here is the same actually as this one. So and this element here is the same as this one right here. But notice when you put them all together, it creates this neat, larger block. Another example of elements fusing together would be down here. These are elements that are fusing when the tables are put together. So this is one table. Here's one table, and here is one table. And when you fuse these together and you put these tables together, you see that this larger green gets created. And it's actually made of two of these green pieces that are reflected. This single red triangle is reflected over here, and that creates this larger red triangle. So you definitely want your tables to connect so you have a fusion between elements. You also want to choose elements that will indeed overlap and connect with one another. For example, this element right here and this element. The person purposefully thought, I'm going to make this part green, and then I'm going to create this other element that has this part green. So when I put them together, it creates one big. It's always really helpful when your tables are put together so they can fuse and reflect with one another. So notice all four of these tables are put together, so there's consistency. And so this is really composed of 4 tables, but you don't really notice that. And each of these tables is composed of 16 little boxes, but you don't even notice that because this person did a good job of erasing those pencil lines. Because of all of these lines, it is very obvious that this comes from a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a 5 by 5 grid. Deleted all of these lines and erased these lines rather than accentuated them. You do not want to emphasize your pencil lines. So ideally you want your tables to fuse together. Some people chose to have them fuse but then created a blank space. There is a little bit of a sense, especially since these pencil lines are not erased, there's a pretty strong sense that this is coming from a grid that was once a system. Additionally, they would lose points for neatness because of all of these little tick marks that go along here, which of course they needed because that was what they needed to create an accurate project, but you need to erase those to create a neat project. Down here is another example. If this person had gone along and erased those little tick marks, then their neatness score would have improved. Additionally, making sure to color in really saturatedly so that there's no little bits of white space showing up would be wise. And even the process of coloring, you can tell that this person was just coloring this part and then only colored this part. And the reason why I can tell is because there's this line right there. Ideally, when you're creating this, you want to just color all the way across and all the way through so you create a stronger sense of fusion. Like the person did a nice job here, because you notice the pencil stroke of the red just goes all the way through. And so there are those little artistic tricks that you can use to make sure that there's a clear cohesion between your elements. This is one table, and these were my cells. And so as you can see, I tried not to make it visible that there was a line here. So when I erase these parts, you will see that there is not a very visible line right here. Same thing with the line between here. Now, of course, you can see this differentiation, but that's 2 different colors. It's supposed to be there. And notice then I did reflection so that this triangle reflected here, and I purposely did my coloring in across this line to accentuate that connectivity. It's always nice to do some outlining to make your project pop. So I chose to outline, this is another one I did, I chose to outline the overall piece, and then I outlined the individual parts just to create a stronger border between each pieces. Very different from outlining the original grid, which would emphasize all the individual parts. That is very different. What this person did was just outlined the larger shapes that were created. And so that really made this pop. It also took away from any errors of coloring outside of bounds. So having an outline is a helpful approach to cover up any inaccuracies. Although, of course, then you want to actually outline accurately and, don't forget to outline all parts. And notice the nullifier goes through the middle, and you sort of have the nullifier here. And notice you see that nullifier existing here. What he did was a reflection, and so that's why you see the nullifier here, and here, and here. Okay, this one, for example, some of the elements fuse, but it's not trying to be real obvious that this came